Revan Skywalker, aboard a ship en route to Coruscant, is haunted by intense visions of a past long buried within the Force. In his dreams, he walks the Starforge, reliving battles and confrontations with Darth Malak, a figure who was once a close friend, now turned enemy. As Malak taunts him with the fractured pieces of their shared history, Revan is torn between his identity as a Jedi or a Sith. Meanwhile, Anakin, still innocent and hopeful, remains unaware of the dark burden Revan carries. Padmé watches on, concerned by the shadows growing within him, and Qui-Gon Jinn senses a troubling shift in the Force. As they approach Coruscant, Revan's destiny grows ever more uncertain, caught between a future he desires and the one he cannot escape. With each passing moment, the Force around him fractures, and Revan is forced to confront the ghosts of his past and the echoes of the Starforge, pushing him toward a fate that may not belong to the light. In this narrative, Revan Skywalker, tormented by dreams of a dark past, is torn between his legacy as a Jedi and the shadows of his former Sith life. The Starforge, an ancient and powerful creation, looms large in his memories, as does the haunting presence of Malak, his former friend turned enemy. These visions, filled with betrayal and conflict, leave Revan questioning his place in the galaxy. Meanwhile, Anakin, his younger brother, remains unaware of the heavy burden Revan carries, while Padmé watches on, troubled by his inner turmoil. As the ship approaches Coruscant, the Force seems to fracture around Revan, each step toward the capital heightening his dread. Qui-Gon Jinn, sensing a shift in the Force, begins to fear that Revan may be on a path that leads him far from the light. The city of Coruscant glistens in the distance, yet beneath its shining towers, the Force trembles, and the future of these two brothers hangs in the balance. Revan had once thought that bringing himself and Anakin back to Coruscant would be a simple mission stand before the Council, especially Grandmaster Yoda, and seek permission for Revan to train as a Jedi, all while uncovering the source of his unsettling visions. But as the pieces of the puzzle slowly fell into place, things became more complicated, almost impossible. His theory, still unconfirmed, hung on one crucial lead: whether a Master Jar had ever existed during the Jedi Civil War. If so, it would confirm his worst fear, that the child before him was not just named after one of the most infamous Sith Lords, but was, in fact, the reincarnation of that very dark figure. The thought was almost too much to comprehend. For generations, both Jedi and Sith had sought immortality, but while the Sith clung to unnatural methods like transferring their essence into other bodies, it was a corrupt and parasitic form of existence that twisted the body and soul. Such immortality, if one could call it that, was not true life. It was a desperate battle against time, a fight that always ended in failure. It was a twisted reflection of the Sith's own dark nature. For over 25,000 years, their order had repeatedly defied the laws of nature, breaking the boundaries of the Force to bend reality to their will and to achieve what they could not in their lifetime. Countless records had chronicled their actions, their betrayals, and their conflicts. But as he watched Revan, there was no hint of malevolence. Despite knowing him for only a short time, there was no reason to believe Revan was possessed by the dark spirit of a Sith Lord who had once caused galactic chaos. This Sith had nearly wiped out the Jedi, only to be undone by the very apprentice who had once served him. The galaxy believed the Sith were gone, yet the Force seemed to have something else in mind. Was it possible that Revan, the infamous prodigal knight, had returned? And if so, why? For 1,000 years, peace had enveloped the galaxy after the fall of the Sith. Yet, after an encounter with an assassin on Tatooine, doubts clouded the mind of one man. What if the impossible were true? The Sith had not only returned, but had secretly been preparing for war throughout the millennium. Was this the true reason for Revan's return, even without knowing he was the reincarnation of the original prodigal knight? The Force seemed to understand that no Jedi alive could face the coming storm. After centuries of peacekeeping, the Jedi were unprepared for the war that loomed on the horizon. The Republic, once mighty, had abandoned its army, leaving the Jedi to defend a galaxy that could no longer rely on simple negotiations or mind tricks to solve its deepest conflicts. The shadow of a resurgent Sith Empire loomed large, and Revan feared the galaxy was heading toward a reckoning it could never escape. Revan Skywalker has always walked a path of his own, even if it meant straying from the Jedi Code. He was the type of Jedi who preferred to explore the galaxy and interact with its people rather than stick to the rigid doctrines of the Order. His methods, like using mind tricks to sway others, were frowned upon, but he felt they were better than resorting to violence. After all, he learned everything, good and bad, from his former master. But when it came to the Sith, Revan knew no Jedi, save for perhaps the Grand Master, would hesitate to strike down their enemies. And this is where Revan's internal struggle grows. If his suspicions were correct that he was the reincarnation of the original, Revan would the Jedi see him as a threat and call for his execution. As Coruscant looms in the distance, the Force itself trembles around him, torn between the future he desires and the dark legacy that haunts him. The tension builds as he must confront the ghosts of his past, and perhaps his future. Revan found himself caught between conflicting forces, a legacy he couldn't escape, and a future he wasn't sure he could embrace. He was torn between the Jedi path and something darker, a path that might lead him into a shadowed past he couldn't remember but still felt. With every passing moment, the visions of his past life haunted him, reminding him of the war that once scarred the galaxy. While his younger brother Anakin remained blissfully unaware of the burden Revan carried, his own fear grew as the Jedi's scrutiny over them deepened. The Order was curious about Anakin's potential, yet the uncertainty of what might happen when they arrived at Coruscant weighed heavily on Revan. As the ship approached the capital, the tension in the air was palpable. Revan was determined to protect Anakin at all costs, even if it meant betraying the very Order that sought to keep them in check. As they approached the loading ramp, the Queen stood waiting with her handmaidens, and even Captain Panaka appeared uneasy, though Revan noticed the true weight of his own burden more than anything else. With Qui-Gon's watchful eye on him, it was clear that the boy's fate and his own hung in the balance as the galaxy's future seemed ready to tip into uncertainty. Revan stood before the Queen, the weight of the moment heavy in the air. The Senate had called an emergency session to address the crisis on Naboo, and now the Queen's silent demeanor spoke volume. She seemed to be measuring the man in front of her, gauging his worthiness for the title of Supreme Chancellor. When she finally spoke, her words were calm, emotionless. "I appreciate your concern, Chancellor," she replied softly, but there was something more beneath the surface. Revan, standing on the platform, glanced between the Queen and Padmé, whose presence was barely visible next to the decoy Queen. Confused by the Queen's detached tone, he couldn't help but ask through the Force bond he shared with Padmé, wondering why she spoke this way. This bond, still a mystery to him, only added to his growing unease. After just a day of knowing Padmé, Revan couldn't fathom how their connection had formed, and yet the strange bond seemed to be leading him toward more questions than answers. Revan couldn't help but smile at his brother's unshakable excitement. Anakin's optimism, especially given their circumstances, was a welcome contrast to his own growing doubts. "Aren't you excited?" Anakin asked, his eyes wide with hope. "Today, we finally become Jedi, just like we always dreamed." But for Revan, that dream had faded into a distant memory. Once, he would have shared Anakin's enthusiasm, but now, after his haunting visions of a chaotic future filled with destruction and betrayal, the idea of becoming a Jedi felt like a broken promise. He couldn't shake the fear of being manipulated, reprogrammed, like a mere machine. But, despite his own uncertainty, Revan couldn't bring himself to crush his brother's joy. He held his silence, choosing to protect Anakin's hope, even if his own was slipping away. Revan, torn between his desires and the weight of his past, vowed to do whatever it took to follow his path, even if it meant leaving Anakin behind. His thoughts were consumed with rescuing his mother from the cruel life of slavery and offering her a future far from the oppressive Outer Rim. He envisioned a day when they could free not only her but others in the galaxy, taking on the challenge of liberating slaves across countless worlds. Anakin, with an eager spirit, shared his vision of freeing his mother, the droid companions, and countless others, though he hesitated at the thought of the latter. His determination to rid the galaxy of such injustice was met with admiration from Qui-Gon, who cautioned him to focus on the present moment as they prepared to meet the Jedi Council. It was a crucial day, and distractions could cost them dearly. On their journey to Coruscant, Revan's mind is plagued by unsettling visions of a past life, filled with war, betrayal, and the shadow of a former friend turned foe. While the others remain unaware of the heavy burden he carries, Anakin remains blissfully hopeful, contrasting Revan's internal torment. As the Queen and her handmaidens appear graceful in their fine robes, Revan and Qui-Gon stand out in their worn, dusty attire, provoking a moment of light sarcasm about their less than impressive appearance. Despite the levity, a deeper unease settles in as Revan begins to realize that his path may not lead to the light. The closer they get to Coruscant, the more fractured the Force becomes, reflecting the internal battle Revan faces between the man he wants to be and the one he once was. His connection to the past only grows stronger, but will it drag him back into the shadows? Only time will tell as his journey continues toward an uncertain fate. Revan stood at the end of the ship, a faint smile on his lips as he exchanged a few words with a companion. His eyes, however, were scanning the crowd of handmaidens gathered around the Queen. They stood like a protective wall, but he couldn't help but wonder if that was their only purpose, to shield her from unseen threats. It was a chilling thought. Why, then, wasn't it the Queen's guards trained soldiers with armor and weapons who should have been tasked with such a vital duty? As he pondered, a soft voice echoed in his mind, breaking through the confusion. Padmé's voice, gentle and calm, answered his unspoken thoughts. "Because my people have no need for weapons, Revan." The words nearly made him flinch, but he steadied himself, keeping his composure. Revan's frustration is palpable as he stumbles, trying to locate Padmé, who is clearly enjoying his discomfort. She teases him with a smirk, her expression betraying nothing of the fun she's having. "And miss that look on your face?" she teases, a mischievous glint in her eye. Revan, never one to back down, shoots back with a dry remark. "I'm glad you're entertained, Your Majesty," his tone playful but with a hint of sarcasm. Still, his concern lingers. He can't understand why Padmé insists on using handmaidens when she has a full squad of royal guards at her disposal. He suggests with a wry smile, "Unless it's just old Panaka who needs to protect you." But Padmé cuts him off, her voice sharp, as if to say there's much more to the situation than he knows. She's not just surrounded by guards, she's guarded by a legacy. In the midst of uncertainty, a queen stands before her people, a decision weighing heavily on her heart. Surrounded by armed guards, she hesitates. She does not want to instill fear in her people at a time when fear already consumes them. But the ever-watchful knight, sensing her distress, reminds her that her duty as queen means she must be protected, even if she wishes to shield her people from fear. With a soft smile, she teases him, asking if he, the brave knight, will be the one to protect her. The tension lingers, an unspoken understanding between the two, as duty and desire intertwine. The weight of leadership, of love, and of destiny presses on their hearts as the forces of the galaxy continue to shape their fates. Revan, ever the enigma, exchanged a playful banter with the disguised queen as the tension between them deepened. "Would you like me to protect you, Your Highness?" he offered, his words light, though his heart harbored much darker thoughts. Padmé, ever quick with her wit, teased back, "Are you offering?" His smile was faint but sincere as he responded, hinting at the uncertainty that lingered in his mind. "Maybe. Depending on the day with the Jedi, I might need somewhere to stay. Credits don't grow on trees and Tatooine feels far off." Padmé, sensing his unease, questioned him further. "You don't think the Jedi will accept you and Anakin?" Revan's gaze was distant, filled with a quiet, knowing confidence. "I think they'd be fools not to accept Anakin. Sure, he's older than the other younglings, but with the right guidance, he could be a force to reckon with. Given time, he could become a formidable Jedi." Yet beneath his words, the shadows of his past loomed, pulling him into the very depths of a destiny he could neither embrace nor escape. He looked away, voice low with resignation as he said, "But you don't think they'll accept you?" She didn't respond because they both already knew the answer. "I'm pretty old, Padmé." Her reply came quickly, gently, "You're only 14. He paused, then clarified with a bitter edge, "For a Jedi." He saw the others' children raised in the temple since they could walk, molded by the Force, their lives defined by discipline and duty. But before he could fall deeper into that comparison, she cut in, fierce with quiet conviction, "But you already know how to use the Force." Revan couldn't help but feel a deep sense of unease as he spoke, walking away from Padmé and the others. "I may know a few things, but there's so much more I need to learn. I'm self-taught, and everything I know, I saw in a vision. It's not the same as being trained by Jedi with decades of experience." His voice was firm, but the weight of his words hung in the air. Despite his growing abilities, there was something inside him that feared the dark future he might be headed toward. As Revan stepped off the ship, he couldn't shake the haunting feeling that his past and future were tied to forces beyond his control. Ahead, he saw two figures surrounded by guards. But it was only the youngest one who seemed truly protected. Revan Skywalker stood before two men who exuded a strange, unsettling presence. The first man, neither young nor old, with silver hair and sharp features, wore long black robes fastened by a thick belt. His unreadable gaze locked on Revan, and though he seemed harmless enough, something about him felt off. The second man, older, his red hair now graying, wore a flowing blue cloak that whipped in the wind. But his presence was even more disconcerting. It was as if he wasn't truly there at all, a feeling Revan couldn't shake, though Qui-Gon and Obi-Wan seemed unaffected. As the men bowed before each other, Revan couldn't help but note the oddities he sensed, the subtle warning in the air. Despite their outward politeness, Revan made a mental note to watch them closely, unsure of the dark secrets they might be hiding. The Queen, adorned in striking black and gold robes, made her entrance with an air of grace and authority, her headpiece adding to her stature as she descended the ramp. Her handmaidens, cloaked in deep crimson, stood in shadows, their faces obscured. Accompanied by Captain Panaka and the Naboo guards, the Queen passed the Jedi, the Gungan, and two boys, halting before the two older men. The elder of the two smiled warmly, bowing his head and offering a respectful greeting, expressing his relief at seeing her alive after the loss of contact. He introduced the stern yet welcoming Supreme Chancellor, who added his own greeting with a faint smile. In a tense moment aboard the Queen's starship, the Supreme Chancellor addresses Queen Amidala with concern about the situation on Naboo, calling for a Senate session to discuss relief. Amidala responds coolly, her silence carrying more weight than words. Revan, observing the scene, can't help but question the Queen's detached demeanor. He wonders, through their Force connection, why she speaks with such coldness. Padmé, standing nearby, becomes an unspoken presence as Revan tries to make sense of their mysterious bond, still unsure of its origin. What starts as a formal meeting soon unfolds into a web of unanswered questions and shifting allegiances, leaving Revan trapped between the legacy of his past and the uncertain future ahead. Revan stood, his brow furrowing as he tried to find the right words. She sounds emotionless. He hesitated, trying not to offend her, but struggling to express his thoughts. Through their Force bond, the disguised handmaiden's voice replied with an almost indifferent tone. "Sound like what?" Padmé, watching carefully, responded firmly. "She sounds fine," her voice betraying no hint of doubt. Yet Revan couldn't shake his disbelief and shot her a look. "Are we hearing the same woman?" he asked, his voice trailing off in disbelief. The tension in the air was palpable, the unspoken understanding hanging between them like a fragile thread as the weight of their words lingered. "Wait a minute, is that really how you sound when you're the Queen?" he asked, the pieces finally clicking in his mind. When she didn't respond, he couldn't help but laugh quietly to himself, earning confused looks from the others, though he brushed them off. "I've heard it all now," the Queen snapped, her eyes narrowing. She had never been one to tolerate mockery. "What's so funny about the way I speak?" she demanded. "Are you serious right now?" he asked, his voice dripping with disbelief. Revan Skywalker had poured more emotion into HK, but Padmé couldn't help but question his approach. "Wait, you don't speak to your people like that, do you?" she asked, her concern evident. Revan, with his usual calm, responded simply, "Yes." Padmé, though surprised, admitted that there were no complaints. Still, Revan couldn't help but point out that, had he been on Naboo, he wouldn't have dared tell the Queen she sounded like a droid. With a sharp retort, Padmé shot back, her voice rising in agitation. "I do not sound like a droid." Revan, unfazed, remained composed, the tension between them growing with every word. Revan's attempt to ease the tension with Padmé falls flat as she cuts him off, her words sharp and unwavering. She insists she isn't pretending to be the Queen, she's the Queen. Revan, unbothered, calmly counters with a teasing remark, finding amusement in how easily he can get a rise out of her. His comment about her voice, comparing it to that of a droid, only adds fuel to the fire. The exchange is charged with a mixture of subtle humor and quiet defiance, a reminder of the complex dynamics between the characters, each one carrying their own burdens and masks, hidden behind their words and actions. Revan stood there, eyes gleaming with challenge. "Nothing to add, Your Majesty?" he teased, watching as Padmé struggled for a retort, only to mutter a frustrated, "Shut up." The sly grin that crept across Revan's face only fueled her annoyance. The rivalry was clear. Revan 1, Padmé 0. As their ragtag group moved toward a shuttle, likely heading to the Senate or perhaps even the Jedi Temple, Revan's thoughts drifted to the visions that plagued him. The looming Mandalorian War, so eerily similar to the ancient conflicts he'd read about, weighed heavily on him. His instincts told him to trust the Republic, knowing how long the Jedi would take to respond. The past and future collided, leaving Revan torn between what he knew and what might come to pass. As the Queen's starship cruised through the stars, Revan Skywalker found himself haunted by dreams of an ancient past, visions that twisted and burned through his mind. He walked the ruined halls of the Starforge, facing Darth Malak, his former ally turned greatest enemy. The past was a war of betrayal, a galaxy torn apart, and the echo of Revan's fall to the dark side. While Anakin remained blissfully unaware of the weight Revan carried, Padmé watched in silence, concerned by the shadows that followed him. Qui-Gon, ever watchful, feared Revan's path might stray from the light, and as they neared Coruscant, the Force itself seemed to fracture around the conflicted boy. Revan struggled, torn between who he was and the dark memories that seemed to consume him. A galaxy in turmoil mirrored his own turmoil, as his destiny seemed forever linked to a past he could neither escape nor remember fully. On their journey towards Coruscant, Revan finds himself tormented by unsettling visions, fragments of a past life that refuse to fade. His dreams are haunted by the Starforge, where he faces Darth Malak, a former ally turned bitter enemy. The echoes of their war and the shadows of their fallen empire threaten to pull him back into the darkness, casting doubt on whether he is truly a Jedi or something far more dangerous. Meanwhile, Anakin, filled with innocent hope, remains unaware of the burden Revan carries. As they approach Coruscant, the city of gleaming towers, the Force itself begins to crack around Revan, torn between a future he desires and the haunting past that follows him. His path becomes a silent struggle, one that even Qui-Gon begins to fear may lead him astray. Yet Anakin, ever the optimist, insists on bringing his new friend along for the ride, hoping to keep the bond intact, unaware of the storm brewing just beneath the surface. It seems like you've shared a detailed plot outline for a story titled Legacy of the Starforge, which involves Revan Skywalker, Anakin Skywalker, and Darth Malak, in a narrative set in a galaxy filled with deep conflict, mythology, and the struggle between light and dark. The style of the story leans heavily on mythic comic realism, with a strong visual influence from American comic art, evoking both emotional weight and dramatic tension. There's a notable focus on Revan's internal conflict, particularly concerning his past as a Sith and his current path as a Jedi, all while he navigates his relationships with other iconic characters from the Star Wars universe. Would you like any specific advice, or are you looking for further development or feedback on any part of this? Revan had only known him for a short time, not enough to form an opinion. "Aren't you from Naboo too?" he asked. "Uh-huh," came the reply. "Well, then this affects you too," Revan said, referring to the emergency Senate meeting. "Hopefully the Republic will get their act together and send help." "Pull it out of where?" Anakin asked, raising an eyebrow. "Never mind," Revan quickly responded, receiving a pout and glare from his brother, who was frustrated by being left out of the loop. Revan, Anakin, Jar Jar, and the Queen silently boarded the shuttle, their minds preoccupied with the journey ahead. Revan sat, watching an elderly man cast an unsettling gaze at them from the front. His eyes weren't filled with disdain, but with suspicion, making Revan uneasy as he pondered the meaning behind the stare. As the shuttle began to move, Jar Jar muttered his discomfort, and though Anakin nodded in agreement, his face remained set in a determined silence. Revan, ever the protector, assured them that they would be fine as they approached the towering silhouette of the Senate building on the horizon. The sight was both grand and daunting, mirroring the turbulent emotions brewing inside him, torn between destiny and past memories, while the weight of the Force seemed to shift around him with each passing moment. In a galaxy torn between the shadows of the past and the uncertainty of the future, one man must confront the darkness within. A seasoned master, having trained a powerful apprentice, knows the cruel truth. His apprentice's strength will never surpass his own. Yet, it is the way of their order, where survival and strength are built on conflict. But as victory turns hollow, a new presence arrives, shaking him to his core, a power unlike anything he has ever felt before. The Force trembles as a mysterious, neutral force enters the fray. This presence, neither Jedi nor Sith, carries an air of ancient strength, pulling at the very fabric of the galaxy's balance. It is a force that could alter the fate of all. One harbors a thirst for power, the other a yearning to possess it. Trained as an assassin, the apprentice would never be strong enough to defeat his master, though the master believed failure would only come if the apprentice didn't try. This is the way of the Sith, a path carved out by Darth Bane, one that has ensured their survival through time. The master should have relished in his victory, yet something changed. He felt it the moment they arrived, a presence unlike any he'd encountered before, as if staring directly into the heart of the Force itself. It belonged to someone powerful, a warrior of great renown. But this presence wasn't a Jedi or a Sith, it was neutral, neither light nor dark. The scene you've painted is so rich with emotion and inner conflict. Revan and Malak's relationship is tragic, defined by betrayal, ambition, and a deep shared history. Revan standing there, torn between who he was and who he is now, brings a powerful internal struggle. Malak's mockery, laced with bitter truth, only deepens Revan's guilt and the gravity of his decisions. The imagery of Malak's crimson eyes and Revan's jaw plate as a physical manifestation of their past is a perfect touch. It's like they are both bound by the choices they've made, unable to escape the weight of those scars, both literal and emotional. If this were to unfold as a visual, what do you imagine their surroundings to be like? A desolate landscape reflecting their shattered bond, or perhaps something more symbolic of their inner turmoil? As Revan Skywalker journeys toward Coruscant, haunted by visions of a past intertwined with the Starforge, his thoughts become a battleground. In dreams, he faces Darth Malak, a former friend turned enemy, taunting him with the echoes of a forgotten war and a fall into darkness. Revan grapples with his identity caught between the Jedi path and the shadow of the Sith. Anakin, ever hopeful, remains unaware of the burden his brother carries, while Padmé silently watches, her concern deepening with each passing day. As Coruscant comes into view, Revan's destiny becomes clearer yet more fragmented. The Force trembles around him, a reflection of the fractured path he must walk. With the Jedi Council awaiting their arrival, Revan finds himself torn between a past he cannot escape and a future he desperately wishes to avoid. Amidst this turmoil, his journey on the crowded streets of Coruscant is only the beginning of the clash between light and shadow. As Anakin splashed water across his face, a smile lit up his features. "Actual running water, and lots of it too!" he exclaimed, amazed by the luxury he had never experienced before. "The people here are so lucky." But Revan, leaning against the wall nearby, couldn't share his enthusiasm. "I wouldn't say lucky, Ani," he replied, his tone laced with a deeper understanding. "More like privileged. They've never known what it's like to struggle, to fail, and go hungry." Anakin, still grinning, shot back, "Why, you gotta be such a pessimist." But Revan's words hung in the air, heavy with the weight of experiences Anakin couldn't yet grasp. Revan stood in front of the mirror, wiping his face dry with a towel, his mind heavy with thoughts of his mother. But not everyone is like that. "Mum's special," he muttered, guilt weighing down on him as the words left his lips. Anakin, still bright-eyed and innocent, agreed, his face now clean and free from the dirt that had once stained it. "But doesn't Mum always say you shouldn't judge a book by its cover?" he asked, his voice filled with curiosity. Revan sighed, the burden of his past pressing down on him as he muttered, "Hard to do that when you already know the contents of the book." As he stepped away from the wall, a quiet resolve settled in him, though the unease never fully left. "Move aside, Titch," he said, his words carrying the weight of everything unspoken between them. Revan wiped the water from his face, feeling the weight of his mother's absence. His words came out heavy, but with conviction. Mum's special. Anakin, ever the optimist, couldn't help but agree, though he couldn't understand why Revan carried such burden. Revan, trying to push through the guilt that clung to him, murmured, "Hard to not judge when you already know the story." With that, he moved toward the sink, leaving Anakin to wrestle with the uncertainty in his words. As they both stood there, the weight of their differing paths began to pull at them, one with a past that still haunted, the other with a future that seemed wide open. Anakin, in his usual curious manner, was confused by the comment, especially the remark about his height. He couldn't help but feel a little touchy about being called short. But that wasn't the real issue, it was the question that followed. How do you know what the people here are like? You've never been here before. He couldn't hold back the frustration. He was eager for answers, but the shadows of uncertainty clung to Revan. Revan, though, was more lost in his own swirling thoughts, the burden of his past gnawing at him as he tried to remain the protector. Anakin, with his wide eyes and innocent optimism, could never understand the weight Revan was carrying. Yet, the tension was undeniable. Even the gleaming towers of Coruscant could not distract them from the fractured force, as the past and future seemed destined to collide. Revan, standing over the sink, couldn't help but reflect on the grim truth of the world around him. He knew the people here too well. They were all driven by self-interest, willing to betray even their closest allies for their own gain. As the water splashed over his hands, he pondered the reality of his situation. His thoughts drifting toward the future. A future clouded by visions of conflict, where he'd find himself trapped in a cycle of war and self-doubt. He regretted that his mission had led him back to the Nubian ship, as he'd hoped for a moment of clarity, a chance to change his course before the inevitable Mandalorian war. His future was uncertain, shaped by memories of the past and the haunting truth of his connection to a dark destiny. He knew that, in time, he and his friend Alec would venture into the unknown regions, chasing a shadowy force, only to make a fatal mistake that would strip them of their identities for a time. Yet, with his knowledge of what was to come, could he find a way to stop it before it was too late? Revan leaned over the sink, letting the water soak through his thick dark hair, his voice calm but edged with a quiet intensity. "Just keep your guard up, all right?" he said, his tone more of a demand than a suggestion. "Trust no one but me." Anakin, despite the confusion in his mind, knew better than to question his older brother. "All right," he muttered, understanding that defying him wasn't an option. As their mother stayed home, Revan found himself burdened by unseen forces, constantly battling within. But Anakin, ever the hopeful one, couldn't help but wonder about others. About Qui-Gon, the Queen, and even Jar Jar. His curiosity bubbling up with innocent concern. Revan's warning hung heavy, casting a shadow over Anakin's simple questions. Revan ran his fingers through his hair, the cool water easing his mind. "Odd? I didn't hear Obi-Wan's name on that list?" he remarked, puzzled. Anakin, ever the hopeful one, shifted uncomfortably. I don't think he likes us much," he mumbled, reflecting on the aloofness of the Jedi Padawan. "Every time I try to talk to him, he just ignores me, and when we enter the same room, he leaves." Revan, still washing his face, waved off Anakin's concern with a shrug. "I wouldn't worry about it, Ani," he said nonchalantly. "He's probably just threatened by us, or maybe he's afraid we're trying to steal his master." A grimace crossed Revan's face as he noticed the water change color, realizing it had been far too long since he'd had a proper wash. Anakin burst out, frustrated, "But we're not!" He couldn't understand why Obi-Wan seemed so distant. Maybe he saw them as threats. "Maybe he thinks Qui-Gon will replace him with us," Revan added coolly, brushing off Anakin's quip about fathers. He had no interest in that kind of talk. So what if he never knew his own father, and his mother refused to speak of him? Growing up on the scorched sands of Tatooine, his mother and brother were all he needed. She taught him how to survive, and everything else he learned on his own. Who needed a father to become whole? He turned out fine, scarred, but unbroken. In a world where a young boy is thrust into the role of protector, he finds himself questioning the need for a father figure. His life, shaped by the responsibility of safeguarding his family, leaves little room for weakness or guidance from others. He carries the weight of being the man of the house, yet doubts flicker in his mind who truly needs a father. Despite the obvious contradictions of his beliefs, he insists that he's doing just fine on his own. But as the story unfolds, the truth behind his resistance begins to unravel, revealing layers of conflict, self-doubt, and the undeniable need for support in a world too complicated for anyone to face alone. The journey is as much about survival as it is about understanding the bonds that define a man's path. Revan moves silently through the corridor of the ship, shadowed by Qui-Gon, whose eyes briefly rested on the Gungan with a flicker of sympathy. The creature was awkward, perhaps, but not dangerous. As they passed the Queen standing near the ramp, Qui-Gon turned toward the throne room, calculating that she and her handmaidens wouldn't be there, especially with security now heightened on Coruscant, a city ripe for hidden threats. Inside the vacant chamber, the air heavy with silence, Qui-Gon's voice softened. "Now that we're alone, want to talk about your dream?" Revan looked down, his voice barely audible. "I dreamt of Malak." The name trembled in the space between them, anchoring Revan to a legacy he could not escape. The weight of everything that had befallen Alec, the friend he had once known, pressed against his heart. Qui-Gon's expression darkened slightly, curious but cautious, as he responded, "I don't think you've mentioned this Malak before." Anakin looked away quickly, embarrassed that he had even asked, his voice shrinking as he muttered something about sticking to the practical. Revan gave a casual shrug, wiping down his arms, then leaned in with a sly smirk just between them. He figured someone like Padmé would probably admire a man with insight, not someone who thought rushing into battle could fix the galaxy. Anakin, trying to sound indifferent, stammered a weak reply, but the blush rising in his cheeks betrayed him. He tried to deflect, said he didn't think she looked like an angel. Revan raised an eyebrow, amused. Who said anything about her looking like an angel? Revan smirked, his thoughts turning inward as Anakin muttered and left the room, his footsteps fading behind the door. Alone, Revan's eyes scanned the opulent space around him, a room dripping with silks and treasures that would take a lifetime to afford, if ever. It was clear that money was no object for the senator who had welcomed them earlier, the queen now lost in their absence. But Revan, uninterested in the wealth that surrounded them, turned his attention to the lone Gungan by the massive windows. The windows were less barriers and more invitations to a world that seemed utterly transparent, as though privacy meant little to the people here, or perhaps they had nothing to hide. Revan couldn't say for sure, but he assumed that like the harsh desert of Tatooine, Coruscant had its own customs. The city stretched before him, both a wonder and a mystery. Anakin approached with gentle concern, noticing the way Jar's ears drooped lower than usual. The boy's voice was soft, uncertain, as he asked if the Gungan was all right. Jar Jar turned from the starry viewport, offering a quick reassurance in his clumsy tone, though his eyes betrayed a deeper unease. Anakin didn't buy it. Stepping closer, his worry etched across his face. Again, Jar Jar insisted he was fine, brushing it off with a trembling laugh. Just nerves, he said, nothing more. But beneath the awkward grin, something fragile stirred. On their journey to Coruscant, Revan Skywalker struggles with haunting visions of a past life. A legacy entangled in the Force. He walks the desolate halls of the Starforge, facing Darth Malak, once his closest friend, now his greatest enemy. Malak taunts Revan with memories of a galaxy torn by war, an ancient emperor's will, and Revan's fall to the shadow. Caught between his identity as a Jedi in training and the dark remnants of his Sith past, Revan's torment deepens. Meanwhile, Anakin, full of hope, remains blissfully unaware of the burden Revan carries, while Padmé silently watches with growing concern. Qui-Gon Jinn, sensing the fracture in the Force, fears Revan's destiny may lead him away from the light. As Coruscant nears, the weight of Revan's memories grows heavier, pulling him closer to a fate that may not be his to choose. Jar's innocent question, why only 2 Jedi were sent to help Naboo, lingered in the air like a challenge no one could fully answer. The blonde boy frowned, clearly puzzled, then shifted his gaze back toward the city beyond, where Coruscant's towers gleamed with overwhelming energy and motion, making Tatooine seem like little more than a dusty footnote in galactic travel. Maybe they didn't know how bad things were, he offered, uncertain, but trying to make sense of decisions made far above his understanding. Why else bring you all the way to Coruscant? Jar Jar, after a pause, nodded thoughtfully. Yusa Hasa Point. A sudden knock interrupted the conversation, and the two exchanged a brief glance before Anakin, curious but uncertain, made his way to the door. Upon pressing the panel to open it, he was met by one of the Queen's handmaidens, though not Padmé. The woman's face, obscured by thick white makeup, gave little away, but her attire stood out this time, black rather than the usual orange. Anakin found it strangely fitting, yet nothing could compare to Padmé's beauty. He blushed, somewhat shy, as their eyes locked, those dark brown eyes reminding him of someone else. "Can I help you?" he asked, a sense of unease creeping over him. "Miss," he added quickly, fearing he might have offended her, "the Queen asked me to collect the 3 of you." The handmaiden's voice was cold, yet composed so different from Padmé's warm, welcoming demeanor. It was clear she was the epitome of perfection, in every way. Well, my brother is still getting cleaned up," Anakin stammered, but the handmaiden remained unfazed, her gaze indifferent. "The Queen does not like to be left waiting," she remarked, her emotionless brown eyes piercing through him, causing him to break into a nervous sweat. Anakin wished it had been Padmé who had greeted them instead. "I can go get him for you. He should be done now, just drying off," Anakin said, trying to regain control of the situation as the handmaiden continued to stare at him in silence. "If you want." Revan felt a chill as the mysterious figure in the doorway stared at him, her face obscured by layers of makeup, leaving him unsure whether she was smiling or glaring. There was something about the coldness in her eyes that unsettled him, but he couldn't place why. "Very good," she responded with a neutral tone, though she remained standing on the other side of the door. Revan, ever the awkward host, invited her in with a hesitant smile, but she declined, her response as sharp as her gaze. "No thank you." Then the urgency hit. "Revan, we've gotta go!" The tension between them hung heavy in the air, a moment of eerie silence before the call to action broke through. Revan's voice cut through the tension, calling out as the water turned off in the bathroom. "Now!" he snapped, eyes briefly darting to the handmaiden. "What have you broken?" From the bathroom came Revan's groan, her face curling with irritation. "We haven't even been here an hour yet." Anakin's eyes were wide with a mix of frustration and hurt. "I didn't break anything," he shot back defensive. "All right, what did Jar Jar break?" Revan asked, oblivious to the offended look the Gungan gave. "Mesa breaking nothing," came Jar's indignant reply. Revan eyed Jar Jar with skepticism, his hum lingering in the air as the bathroom door creaked open to reveal the raven-haired teen drying his face with a towel. Lowering it, Revan's gaze met a familiar yet off presence. A handmaiden stood only meters away, close to Anakin. But it wasn't her. The resemblance to Padmé was uncanny, but the details betrayed the illusion. His instincts whispered the truth. This was the decoy, a stand-in for the queen who had likely shed her servant's guise and reclaimed her crown while on Coruscant. Anakin's voice cut through the tension, introducing her simply. Revan's reply came cold, noting the excessive makeup as an obvious giveaway, but his sharp words struck a nerve. Her jaw twitched, subtle but telling. Revan stood there, his long, thick, black hair still damp as he pondered whether it was time for a haircut. The message was clear. He was needed in the queen's quarters. But as he was about to comply, a sharp interruption came from his companion, questioning the order. The handmaiden, not one for insubordination, glared at him coldly, her eyes narrowing. Her tone was icy as she demanded an explanation for his refusal. Revan's calm demeanor met the tension, the weight of his inner turmoil clear even in the face of the simple request. Revan calmly responded, barely concealing a faint smile as he met the handmaiden's unyielding gaze. "I don't recall stuttering," he said, his tone neutral. "I asked why the queen wants to see us." Her voice remained as emotionless as ever as she answered, "Because she wishes it. My duty is to carry out her desires." Anakin, sensing the tension between Revan and the handmaiden, glanced between them, almost certain they were at odds. "We have no issue going with you," he interjected, trying to lighten the moment. "Right, Reverend?" Revan, unfazed, nodded. "Of course we don't." Revan, with a soft smile, spoke up. "I just don't understand why she wants to see us. We're not politicians. We can't really help her get the aid she needs to save her people." The handmaiden, indifferent, responded, "I don't pretend to know what the queen wants. I just do what I'm told." She glanced at the three men in the room, but her gaze lingered on the two brothers. The Gungan hadn't said a word since Anakin opened the door. Revan, with a knowing smile, turned to the handmaiden, adding, "I'm sure you know her desires better than most." His words earned confused looks from Anakin, Jar Jar, and an annoyed frown from the handmaiden. "You know, being her handmaiden and all," he added, a glint of mischief in his eyes. The handmaiden's words cut through the air, her gaze as sharp as a blade, scrutinizing Revan with a look that could freeze anyone in their tracks. She had been preparing for this moment for some time, and it was clear. "If you're all ready, let us depart," she said, her tone almost mechanical as she turned sharply and began to walk away, none of them aware of the path she'd come from. Revan, with a weary sigh, gave a glance toward her retreating figure. His words, barely more than a murmur. "We shouldn't keep the queen waiting." With a smile as innocent as it was determined, Anakin eagerly took the lead, his youthful energy propelling him forward as he rushed to catch up with the handmaiden. Revan's thoughts were tangled as he walked, his mind dwelling on the mysteries surrounding them. What could she want? He wondered aloud, hoping for a glimpse of the mysterious figure before their meeting with the council. She's probably just keeping an eye on us, making sure we don't cause trouble, or more likely, so we don't bring trouble her way. The group quickly caught up to the handmaiden, who seemed to move at a slow, deliberate pace, or perhaps she had just been waiting for them. "Wisa wouldn't do so that," Jar Jar remarked, offering a hesitant defense. Revan nodded in agreement. "Not intentionally, perhaps, but this place. It's different from places like Tatooine or Naboo. I can't say for sure since I've never been to Naboo, but given their monarchy, it's probably not so different from Coruscant. "You're from Naboo," one of the others noted. Anakin piped up cheerfully from the front, trailing behind the silent handmaiden. "Right, Jar Jar?" The Gungan nodded wildly, ears flapping as he affirmed with a grin, "It's a truie." Curious, the blonde turned his head, asking, "So are the two worlds alike?" The reply came quick, "Not so, really." Revan, ever intrigued by echoes of Naboo beyond the flickers shared through Padmé's thoughts, leaned in with interest. "How so?" His knowledge of the planet was little more than fragmented images and whispers of its history, once a world that mined rare plasma from its core, now shrouded in mystery, just like the Force visions pulling at his soul. The planet's survival, against all odds, remained an unexpected triumph. Despite its crumbling state, it held together, a small miracle in the face of the inevitable. As Revan reflected on this, his thoughts drifted to the Jedi Council and their mysterious absence. His mind wandered, wondering when Qui-Gon and Obi-Wan would return to join the Council's long-awaited meeting. In the vast city of Coruscant, amidst towering buildings, the Jedi Grand Temple stood alone in its grandiosity, a colossal pyramid surrounded by smaller temples and courtyards where Jedi disciples honed their mastery of the Force. Beneath its spires, the Jedi sought peace and solitude, meditating away from the bustle. Inside, life continued as usual. Disciplined study, rigorous training, and the perpetuation of a legacy that had lasted 25 millennia. At the peak of the temple, the Jedi Council convened, their session cloaked in secrecy. The room, an architectural marvel, overlooked the entire city, yet no one outside could hear the proceedings. Within 14 figures sat 12 members of the council and others who waited for the path of the Force to reveal its next move. In a room where wisdom and experience converged, a council of Jedi Masters, each selected for their mastery of the Force, sat in solemn judgment. Among them were the likes of revered figures, the Grand Master and Master of the Order, their gazes fixed on Qui-Gon Jinn and his Padawan Obi-Wan Kenobi. As Qui-Gon spoke, recounting events that had unfolded in the past days, Obi-Wan remained silent, listening with unwavering attention. The council members, sitting in a perfect circle, observed Qui-Gon's every word with familiarity, knowing well his stature among them. Yet, it was their reactions he sought, especially those of the most influential Yoda and Mace Windu. Qui-Gon, aware of their power, focused on them with a sense of anticipation, understanding that his revelations could either be accepted or dismissed outright. As he concluded, the weight of his words hung in the air, leaving a palpable tension that hinted at the uncertainty of what lay ahead for the Jedi and the Republic. Yoda sat quietly, pondering the words of the former Padawan of Dooku, now a Jedi Master, with whom he had shared countless discussions over the years. This Jedi was far from conventional. Unlike many of his peers, he chose to follow the will of the Force, even when it meant defying the norms. His approach was one Yoda admired deeply, wishing future generations would learn from this unorthodox yet wise path. Despite being seen by some as a maverick, even labeled as a gray Jedi, this master embraced the living Force fully. He had once been invited to join the Jedi Council, a position that would have granted him a broader influence. But he refused, fearing it would distort his bond with the Force. He hoped that, after his Padawan completed his trials, he might reconsider this choice. Yet for now, the Forces will remain a guiding light in his solitary journey. The Sith were thought to have been destroyed long ago, and the return would have surely been noticed. Yet, Yoda, ever contemplative, stayed silent, deep in thought, as he listened to the words of a former Padawan turned master. This master, much like his old mentor, was no traditional Jedi. He followed the will of the Force above all, even if it meant breaking with tradition and causing discomfort among his peers. His rebellious spirit was a quality Yoda admired, hoping that future generations might learn from it. Despite being labeled a gray Jedi by many, he was a true follower of the living Force. This had led the Jedi Council to ask him to join their ranks, a request he refused, fearing it would alter his bond with the Force. Yet, Yoda remained hopeful, believing that one day, perhaps after his Padawan's trials, he would reconsider. Deep within himself, he recognized the truth. Qui would never align with their cause. Much like his former master, he rejected the Council's ways, clashing with them at every turn. He saw them as short-sighted, misguided, having lost their connection with the living force, now following the will of the Supreme Chancellor rather than the true will of the Force. Yet, no matter how much he disagreed, nothing could change Qui-Gon's mind. He was steadfast, too much so, just as stubborn as Dooku had been. As tensions rose, Master Yoda spoke, his ancient eyes closing in deep thought. Threatened, the Republic is, if the Sith are involved, he intoned, drawing the attention of all. Ki-Adi-Mundi stared at the Grandmaster in disbelief, unable to grasp the full gravity of the words. He stood firm, his voice edged with disbelief. You cannot honestly believe the Sith have returned. We would have known. But the older Jedi's tone cut through the air, calm yet unsettling. We've been wrong before, he said, shifting every gaze toward him. Or have you forgotten the Great Galactic War? The room stiffened. A glare followed, sharp as a saber. I have not forgotten, came the response, measured but defensive. But the galaxy has changed. We've learned. 1,000 years of peace proves it. Silence lingered. Then, from the shadows, the question cracked the foundation beneath them. Have we? The council room is thick with tension as Master Yarael Poof questions the others, his regal voice breaking the silence. Are we dismissing Qui-Gon's claims about the assassin being a Sith Lord just because we refuse to believe the Sith have returned? Master Mundi meets his gaze, challenging. Do you feel differently? But before Yarael can respond, Plo Koon's synthetic voice cuts in. Does it even matter what he thinks? It seems you've already decided for all of us. Reithkoth stands firm, siding with Mundi. To me, it's nothing more than a dark Jedi trying to kill. The debate rages, yet the weight of their words hangs heavy, each Jedi facing their own doubts and the dark shadow of the Sith, now looming ever closer. Qui-Gon Jinn, a Jedi with years of wisdom, was resolute in his belief. The assassin he faced was not just a fallen Jedi, but a Sith. His voice was firm as he recalled the ferocity of their battle, barely escaping with his life on Tatooine. No one had ever fought with such raw hatred and rage before, a hatred that was not solely aimed at him, but at what he represented, what they all represented. His mind was certain. This was the work of a Sith Lord or someone trained by one from a young age. Adi Gallia, listening intently, questioned what made him so sure, wondering if the assassin could have been a Jedi fallen to the dark side instead. But Qui-Gon's conviction remained unshaken, his experience guiding his every word. The Force, in all its unpredictability, was clear to him this time. This was no ordinary assassin. It was a darkness far more ancient and insidious than anything he had encountered before. Qui-Gon Jinn leaned forward, his thoughts heavy. This is difficult to accept, Mace Windu remarked, his voice tinged with confusion. I do not understand how the Sith could have returned without us knowing. Qui-Gon's eyes darkened as he reflected deeply. Everything, the dark side clouds our perception, he murmured. Perhaps we have become complacent in these times of peace. We must be more vigilant. His gaze swept across the room, his voice firm. We must uncover who or what this assassin is, he declared. The room fell silent as everyone present felt the weight of his words, the threat looming ever larger in their midst. In the depths of Revan's troubled mind, visions of a past life twist and torment him as he journeys aboard the Queen's starship. The dreams are relentless scenes from a time when he stood on the blood-soaked floors of the Starforge, facing Darth Malak, his former friend turned bitter foe. Malak mocks him with cryptic reminders of a forgotten war and an ancient emperor's will, forcing Revan to question his very nature, Jedi or Sith. Meanwhile, Anakin remains blissfully unaware of the burden his brother carries, while Padmé watches in silence, her worry growing with each haunted look from Revan. Qui-Gon Jinn, the ever-watchful observer, grows concerned that the young Jedi's path may veer dangerously toward the darkness. As Coruscant looms closer, the Force trembles around Revan, torn between the future he desires and the one his visions dictate. His fate seemingly sealed by the ghosts of the past. The Neimoidians, driven more by fear than cunning, dared to blockade Naboo, but everyone knew they lacked the nerve for a full-scale invasion. Their desperation became clear when they tried to eliminate 2 Jedi before diplomacy could even begin. Suspicion brewed in the council chambers as one suggested that darker forces, perhaps the Sith, were behind this chaos. But the notion was quickly dismissed. If the Sith had truly returned, wouldn't they strike with bold fury, not political manipulation? Still, another voice wondered aloud, what if the Sith had changed in 1,000 years since their fall? The Trade Federation, especially the Neimoidians, are cunning and calculating. Though driven by greed, they aren't blind to the consequences of their actions. They knew a blockade of Naboo would provoke the Republic, yet they pushed forward, even resorting to drastic measures to eliminate 2 Jedi. But who is really pulling the strings? One Jedi questions whether the Sith are involved, but another doubts that the Sith would act so subtly. Could they have changed over the centuries? The discussion lingers in the air, leaving uncertainty about what lies beneath the surface of this growing conflict. The Keldor male spoke with a neutral tone. "I suppose we're all full of surprises." "How dare you?" came the angry retort. "Enough!" Surprisingly, the voice that intervened belonged to none other than Yaddle, the lone member of Yoda's species, who rarely spoke unless necessary. "Fighting won't lead us anywhere. We must figure out what to do," she said calmly. "Wise words, Master Yaddle," the Grand Master remarked, smiling at his longtime friend, grateful for her insight. "We must uncover who this assassin island." With his face set in stone, a grim determination in his eyes, the Elder spoke with unwavering certainty. "The Republic's security is at stake. We must act." In the midst of the tense silence, a voice rose calm yet probing. "If the assassin's target is the Queen, perhaps we'll see his true face sooner than we expect." One by one, the Masters exchanged knowing glances, the weight of the situation settling in. Another voice, firm and resolute, joined the chorus. "If what you say is true, then this attack was no accident. The Queen is the target." The room buzzed with the intensity of the moment, all eyes turning to the silent figure at the center, whose knowledge of the situation seemed to hold the key to everything. Revan Skywalker stands on the edge of a precipice, torn between 2 worlds. His visions drag him through a war-torn past, where the once mighty Starforge echoes with memories of betrayal and loss. As he faces Darth Malak, his former friend turned bitter enemy, the shadows of his past weigh heavily upon him. The Force twists around him, caught between the light and the darkness he is destined to confront. Meanwhile, Anakin, ever hopeful, remains blissfully unaware of the storm brewing within his brother. Padmé, ever watchful, sees the silent torment in Revan's eyes, while Qui-Gon senses that the path ahead may not be one of redemption. As the gleaming towers of Coruscant approach, Revan knows his fate is tied to a legacy he cannot escape. In a city of light, the darkness within him begins to fracture, threatening to consume everything he holds dear. The journey to Coruscant is no longer just a trip, it's a walk towards a confrontation that could shatter both the past and the future. In the depths of the Jedi Council chamber, the tension was palpable. Yoda, with a sharp gesture of his clawed hand, ordered the Jedi Maverick to protect someone, his voice commanding yet grave. The council members, acknowledging the weight of his decision, murmured their support. Despite the gravity of the moment, Qui-Gon stood silent, a figure lost in contemplation, his mind troubled by the mystery that lay before him. Mace Windu, ever resolute, assured him that every resource would be employed to uncover the truth of his attacker's identity before dismissing the matter with a wave of his hand. "May the Force be with you," he said, a sentiment echoed by Yoda, who bowed his head slightly. As Obi-Wan, the ever-dutiful disciple, paid his respects and turned toward the exit, the looming uncertainty of the task ahead settled like a shadow over Qui-Gon, and the room fell into a heavy silence, each mind adrift with their own thoughts of the trials to come. Revan paused, sensing the absence of Qui-Gon behind him. A deep sigh escaped his mind as he braced for the inevitable. There were more important matters at hand than debating the fate of 2 boys who, despite their age, were no longer candidates for Jedi training. The Masters exchanged bewildered looks, unsure of what more could be said about the assassin and the Queen. Yoda tilted his head, curiosity in his eyes. "More to say, have you, Qui-Gon Jinn?" The Jedi Master's voice was steady as he replied, "With your permission, my master, I have encountered a divergence in the Force." Yoda's knowing smile spread as he leaned forward. "Around the boys, the ones you brought with you? As the council gathered, Qui-Gon's words hung heavily in the air. "2 boys, he revealed, his voice steady, yet filled with an undercurrent of mystery. "Brothers, in fact, with the highest midi-chlorian count I've ever seen." The Jedi Masters exchanged murmurs of disbelief, but Qui-Gon pressed on. "I believe they were conceived by the midi-chlorians themselves." Mace Windu, always the pragmatist, furrowed his brow, his voice cutting through the tension. "You speak of the prophecy, The one who will bring balance to the Force, he asked, his eyes narrowing. The revelation seemed to pulse with a deeper meaning, one that carried echoes of both hope and doom. The promise of balance intertwined with the shadow of an uncertain future. Revan, haunted by disturbing visions, finds himself at the mercy of his own past, walking the battle-torn halls of the Starforge. He is plagued by the shadow of his former friend, Malak, now his greatest enemy. Their history is a twisted legacy, full of betrayal and dark choices. Yet Revan struggles to discern whether he is a Jedi in training or a Sith reborn. Meanwhile, Anakin, unaware of the burden Revan carries, remains innocent and full of hope, while Padmé quietly watches, her concerns growing. Qui-Gon, ever the observer, grows anxious, sensing that Revan's path may no longer align with the light. As they approach Coruscant, the tension within the Force grows, and Revan's fate teeters between what he desires and the haunting destiny that seeks to claim him. Will Revan's inner turmoil pull him into the darkness, or will he find his way back to the light before it's too late? The Force trembles as their journey unfolds, and the future remains uncertain. Qui-Gon insisted with fire in his voice, convinced that the Force was clearly stirring in ways none could deny, but Master Windu silenced the room with a raised hand, signaling an end to debate. He simply ordered that the boys be brought before them. As Obi-Wan moved again to leave the council chambers, expecting it to be over, he glanced back as Master hadn't budged. That alone startled him. Hadn't Qui-Gon already revealed everything? What more could there be? Windu, wearied, voiced the question hovering in everyone's minds. How could Qui-Gon possibly have more to say? Qui-Gon allowed himself a small smile, noting Mace's belief that he had shared all necessary information. Little did Mace know, the true story was far more complicated. Taking a deep breath to steady his nerves, Qui-Gon could feel the churn in his stomach. He hoped his decision wouldn't lead to Revan's doom, praying they would understand. "I'm afraid so, Mace," Qui-Gon said quietly, struggling to find the right words. "It's about the boys I brought with me, especially the eldest." Yoda, with his usual wisdom, observed quietly, his green eyes softening. "Worried you are," he remarked, sensing the deeper concern behind Qui-Gon's words, particularly about one of the boys. Obi-Wan had finally spoken up, questioning his master Qui-Gon after arriving on Coruscant. Qui-Gon, his voice hoarse, responded, reassuring the council that the boy, Anakin, was just an ordinary 9-year-old, not an extraordinary case. But the council wasn't convinced. 9 years old? Ki-Adi-Mundi's voice was full of disbelief. Then surely you know that he's already too old to be trained as a Jedi. Qui-Gon, undeterred, suggested that perhaps these boys, born of the Force, might just be the exception. "If they are indeed Force-born," he said thoughtfully, "shouldn't we make an exception?" The conversation swirled, doubt clouding the room as Qui-Gon made his case, challenging the traditional norms. The weight of destiny and the possibilities of the Force hung in the air, with the future of young Anakin on the line. As Plo Koon scanned the room, his gaze fell on the council members, seeking their responses. "The code is absolute," Oppo Rancisis declared with unwavering confidence, locking eyes with the Kel Dor. "You know this, Plo." Mace Windu raised his hand, halting any further discussion. "For now, we set aside his age," he said, his voice commanding. Then, turning to the others, he demanded, "What is the issue with the eldest?" The room fell silent. "There's no physical issue with him, but Revan!" A murmur swept across the council. Revan? The name hung in the air like a shadow, his past intertwined with the present, his future uncertain. Revan stood in silence, his thoughts consumed by the weight of the past. In the far reaches of his mind, he recalled the destruction he had caused, how he had been responsible for bringing the Sith back into the galaxy after the fall of the ancient empire. Yet, there were those who believed he had nearly brought the Republic and the Jedi Order to ruin, inspiring the dark figures that followed, like the fearsome Darth Sion, Darth Nihilus, and the treacherous Darth Traya. Though many historians claimed Traya to be his Jedi master, the truth was far more complicated. Revan had walked a twisted path, torn between the light and the dark, each step echoing with the legacy of those who came before him and those who would follow. His destiny was uncertain, shaped by visions of war, betrayal, and the fractured remnants of a galaxy at war. Would he be the one to mend the Force, or was he doomed to repeat the mistakes of his past? The galaxy's fate hung in the balance, and Revan's journey had only just begun. Revan stood, lost in thought, weighed down by his memories of the Starforge. He couldn't shake the visions, dark whispers from his past that had shaped the galaxy's fate. Koth spoke up, reminding him of his pivotal role in restoring the Sith after the fall of a great empire, but there was more. He had nearly destroyed both the Jedi Order and the Republic, a legacy of ruin that inspired future generations of Sith. Plo Koon's voice cut through the tension, asking if he meant figures like Dark Scion, Darth Nihilus, and Darth Traya. A grunt was Koth's only reply, acknowledging the truth buried in history. Revan's former master, the one who guided him into darkness, was now a name feared by all. One of the masters, Koth clarified, as the room fell into a heavy silence, each word sinking deeper into the Force's shifting currents. During his time as a Jedi, it was said that Revan had many masters and an insatiable thirst for knowledge. Some believed this very hunger led him down the dark side. As he spoke with a knowing tone, his words sparked a quiet contemplation among those present. However, not everyone was convinced by his reflection, especially Mace Windu. He interrupted, his voice edged with impatience, questioning the boy who shared the same name as Revan. With a growing tension, it was revealed that Revan himself doubted any true connection to the original. His confession sent ripples through the room, and Mace, now visibly anxious, demanded clarification. What did this mean for the boy? And could the legacy he carried truly belong to the light? The room fell silent, the weight of uncertainty pressing on every soul present. The Grandmasters sat in silent tension, one of them gripping his cane with a force that betrayed unease. Obi-Wan and the others exchanged puzzled glances, unable to grasp why Qui-Gon stalled, why worry hung so heavy in his eyes. But within, Qui-Gon struggled with a revelation too great to withhold. At last, after a breath that seemed to stretch across the chamber, he confessed what had haunted him. That Revan was not merely named after the Dark Legend, but was, in truth, his very reincarnation. And so concludes the latest chapter of The Return of the Prodigal Knight and the Phantom Menace, where Revan's instincts whisper of a shadow lurking in Palpatine, something he feels but cannot yet name. On the Queen's starship en route to Coruscant, Revan Skywalker is haunted by disturbing visions of a past life, memories he can't fully grasp, but that seem to cling to him through the Force. In his dreams, he faces his former ally, Darth Malak, now a twisted version of the friend he once knew. Malak taunts him with fragmented memories of wars fought across the galaxy, the will of an ancient emperor, and Revan's fall to the darkness. Torn between his past as a Jedi and the ghost of a Sith, Revan struggles with his identity, unsure if he is truly reborn or merely a shadow of what he once was. Anakin, ever hopeful, remains unaware of the weight Revan carries. Meanwhile, Padmé observes quietly, her worry deepening with every cryptic glance from Revan. Qui-Gon Jinn, though silent, feels a growing fear that Revan's path may not lead to the light. As Coruscant looms closer, the force around Revan fractures, leaving him caught between the destiny he desires and the haunting memories that threaten to consume him.